The millionaire's daughter had never walked until the nanny did something unexpected. There are moments in life when we believe everything is firmly within our grasp. Plans are carefully drawn, dreams woven with precise detail, and the future seems nothing more than a path we simply have to follow. Yet fate is like an unseen storyteller, waiting in the shadows, ready to twist the plot without warning, tearing apart our perfect blueprints and forcing us to begin again from scratch. For Briona Reyes, life once resembled such a carefully sketched map. At 24, she was a bright medical student at Queen's College. Her eyes were full of ambition, her gentle hands carried the dream of healing, of tending to patients in their most fragile hours. Her future seemed destined to be shaped by the crisp white of a lab coat, by the urgent rhythm of hospital hallways. But life never asks what we want. Briona's father died suddenly of a stroke. In a single night, the world she knew collapsed. Medical bills piled up, her mother sank into heavy depression, and her 16-year-old brother still needed food, books, and school. Briona folded away her dream of medicine, tucking it into a drawer. She began working any job she could to keep their fragile roof from falling, waiting tables, scrubbing floors, washing dishes. The hands, once longing to hold a stethoscope, grew rough from wiping tables and mopping tiles. Each night, she returned to their dim apartment, where the tired glow of a weak lamp revealed her mother's hollow face and her brother's hungry eyes for knowledge. In silence, Briona whispered to herself, "As long as they are safe, I will never give up." Briona's life had become a relentless cycle with no escape. Each day she rose before dawn, hurrying from one job to another. In the mornings she served coffee and wiped counters at a cafe. In the afternoon she cleaned apartments, and at night she sometimes washed dishes in a crowded restaurant until her hands ached. The meager dollars she earned barely covered rent for their cramped apartment, her mother's medication, and the school books her younger brother so desperately needed. Late at night, when her family slept, Briona sat quietly in the dark. The dream of a white coat lingered faintly, like a fallen star fading further away each day. She prayed silently, wishing for any chance, no matter how small, to ease the crushing weight on her shoulders. That chance came one morning, though wrapped in a form she had never desired. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lucia, who always showed kindness toward Briona's struggles, knocked softly at her door. "There's a wealthy family looking for a nanny," she whispered. "The little girl is different. Only 4, but she doesn't speak, doesn't walk. Her mother died in an accident last year. Would you consider it?" Briona froze. A nanny? It was something she had never imagined for herself. But the rent was due. Her mother needed medicine. Her brother needed school. She had no choice. On the appointed day, New York wore a somber face, the sky heavy with gray clouds. Briona clutched her worn canvas bag, carrying nothing more than a homemade lunch, her resume, and a handful of scattered hopes. The subway carried her out of the worn streets she knew and into another universe, the Upper East Side, where sidewalks gleamed, glass towers pierced the clouds, luxury cars lined the curbs, and boutique coats cost more than her entire month's rent. Her heart pounded as she walked, each step a reminder that she did not belong here. And yet she lifted her chin, because every step carried the weight of her family behind it. Across the city, Stephen Morgan, 35, lived in the opposite world. A powerful real estate mogul, he commanded skyscrapers and penthouses, his own home a palace of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. Admired for his skill, feared for his arrogance, he seemed untouchable. But at the center of his empire lay a hollow space, his 4-year-old daughter, Jazzie. Since her mother's death, she had not spoken, not walked, not responded to anyone. Specialists from New York and beyond had been summoned, but all gave the same verdict. There is nothing wrong with her body. This is trauma. She needs time. Yet time only deepened the wound. Stephen had become a man of iron, addicted to control, refusing to let anyone near. He had dismissed nanny after nanny, none lasting more than a few months. The Morgan penthouse shimmered like a fortress of glass. Rising over Central Park, it was sleek, modern, immaculate, so flawless that Briona felt like a trespasser in a world she did not belong to. The private elevator doors slid open. The first face she saw was not Stephen's, but Evelyn Morgan's, his mother. In her 60s, Evelyn carried an elegant grace, her kind eyes softened with quiet wisdom. Her smile, warm and genuine, immediately eased a fraction of Briona's fear. "You must be Briona," Evelyn said gently. "Thank you for coming. I believe you might bring something this home has been missing for far too long." Briona lowered her head, clutching her worn bag tighter. Her heart raced so wildly she thought it might burst. And then Stephen Morgan appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in a dark suit, he carried himself with a commanding stride. His eyes swept over Briona from head to toe, cold and quietly disdainful. That look sent a shiver through her, as if in his eyes she were nothing more than an intruder daring to step into his polished world. "This is Briona," Evelyn introduced softly, "and this is Stephen, Jazzie's father." The first exchange hung in the air like a taut string about to snap. Stephen gave a curt nod, his lips parting only to mutter, "Welcome." In his gaze were suspicion, guardedness, and a grief hidden behind stone walls. Briona, though timid, held her ground with fragile composure. Strangely, her simplicity, her honesty unsettled him like a crack in the fortress he had built around himself. Sensing the tension, Evelyn quickly intervened. She touched Briona's shoulder. "Stephen, you should get back to work. I'll give Briona a tour and, of course, introduce her to Jazzie." Stephen said nothing more. He turned sharply, retreating into his office. The door slammed behind him, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against Briona's chest. Following Evelyn down a gleaming hallway lined with expensive paintings and polished wooden floors, Briona marveled at the grandeur. Yet beneath its luxury, the place felt more like a gilded tomb, beautiful, extravagant, but utterly devoid of warmth. At last they stopped at a small door. Evelyn opened it gently. "She spends most of her time here," she whispered, as though afraid to disturb the quiet. Inside, the room overflowed with toys, giant stuffed animals, and a princess bed draped in pastel linens. But in the far corner, curled up on a cream-colored rug, sat a tiny girl. Jazzie clutched an old stuffed fox, her wide gray eyes fixed on the window, still as stone. When Briona walked in, Jazzie sat motionless in the corner, her gray eyes locked on the window. No songs, no laughter, no games, only a heavy silence. Briona whispered, "Hello, sweetheart." Still no response. She gently spread her hands across the carpet, pulling a comic book from her bag. "I brought a book. Would you like to see it?" Sophie didn't turn around. Stephen appeared at the door, arms crossed like a statue. "She hasn't spoken in a year, not since her mother died. It's like she vanished. All you need to do is make sure she doesn't hurt herself. That's all." Briona replied, her voice soft as a breath. "She needs more than that." Stephen shot her a wary look. "Don't think you can save anyone here, Miss Carter. This isn't some tearjerker movie." Then he walked away. Briona's heart tightened. She remembered Sophie's eyes. It was the same emptiness she had once seen in the mirror after her father's death, the same hollow gaze her mother wore when she stopped eating, the same pain her brother tried to hide. Jazzie wasn't simply silent. She was crying out in a language no one else could hear. The air remained heavy after Stephen's abrupt departure. Briona stood frozen, her thoughts tangled, uncertain if she truly belonged in this place. Evelyn let out a soft sigh, her eyes carrying quiet sorrow. "I must apologize for Stephen," she said gently, resting a warm hand on Briona's shoulder. "Since Amelia's passing, he hasn't been himself. His temper is short, his words sharp, but beneath it all, he's only in pain. Please don't take it to heart." Briona nodded, clutching her bag tighter. The unease still lingered, yet Evelyn's words felt like a thin blanket draped over her trembling heart. Guiding her down the hallway, Evelyn opened the door to a smaller room, far cozier than the rest of the house's cold grandeur. "This will be your room. Rest well tonight. Your work will officially begin tomorrow." Briona stepped inside, the door closing softly behind her. For the first time since arriving, she drew in a deep breath. Tomorrow. A new chapter was waiting. The first days in the penthouse drifted by as heavy as storm clouds pressed against the sky. Silence ruled every room, so complete that the echo of Briona's footsteps became the only sound. Jazzie barely responded. She sat endlessly by the window, clutching her worn stuffed fox, her eyes fixed on a distant horizon as if the real world existed somewhere out there, not in this golden cage of a room. Whenever Briona drew closer, the child shrank further inward, retreating into a cocoon of silence. No words, no gestures, not even a blink of acknowledgement. Briona never forced her. She would spread a small rug across the floor, sit a respectful distance away, and open a storybook. Her voice was soft, sometimes whispering like a breeze, sometimes animated with playful character voices. There was no reply. Still, she read page after page with steady patience. At times, she sang lullabies, songs her mother once sang to her and her younger brother. The melodies were sad yet warm, drifting through the air like fragile threads of memory. Jazzie did not turn, but her small shoulders trembled faintly, as though deep within, the music touched a hidden corner of her heart. Stephen, however, saw things differently. Passing by the doorway, he would glance in and frown, convinced her efforts were useless. One morning, catching Briona preparing fresh strawberry juice for Jazzie, his voice thundered across the kitchen. "Don't give her strawberries. She's allergic." Startled, Briona stammered. "But Mrs. Evelyn said Jazzie loved them." "My mother doesn't know everything. Make orange juice. Now." His tone was sharp, final. The door slammed behind him. Briona stood frozen, her throat tight. She knew, without doubt, Jazzie was not allergic. Evelyn had once told her it was Stephen's late wife who confirmed it. Stephen wasn't protecting his daughter. He was lashing out, clinging to control. Swallowing tears, Briona obeyed and made orange juice, but the humiliation clung to her all day. Still, she did not give up. Day after day, she continued to be present for Jazzie. She asked for nothing, demanded nothing. Instead, she offered quiet constancy. Stories read aloud, soft songs, and the gentle language of touch. A hand on the shoulder, a tender stroke of hair, small gestures, yet the only ones Jazzie seemed to allow. Slowly, Jazzie's eyes began to change, from hollow to curious, from numb to faintly alive. She did not speak, but her gaze followed Briona's every movement. Each time Briona smiled, the corners of the child's lips quivered as though her fragile heart was relearning how to respond to warmth. Beyond the nursery walls, Stephen continued his life like clockwork. Morning workouts, endless meetings, evenings sealed in his office. In his world, Briona was little more than a shadow, present yet invisible. On the fourth day of her new job, rain fell hard over the city. The New York sky hung heavy with gray, raindrops drumming steadily against the vast penthouse windows. The whole city seemed shrouded in gloom, and inside the nursery, the silence grew even thicker. Jazzie sat curled in her corner, clutching her worn stuffed fox. Her wide eyes stared into the distance, empty of any light. As usual, Briona spread a rug on the floor, arranging a few toys around her. But instead of reaching for a storybook, she quietly pulled from her bag an old hand puppet her younger brother once used for silly plays. She drew in a breath and lifted her voice into a high, ridiculous pitch. "Hello, I am Sir Dinosaur, and anyone in my way will be... Achoo!" She faked a violent sneeze, throwing herself backward onto the floor, arms and legs flailing like an overturned beetle. It was absurd, foolish, even she felt ridiculous. And then a sound broke through, a tiny giggle. Briona's head snapped up, her eyes widened, her heart hammering. Before her, Jazzie's small hands covered her mouth, her shoulders trembling. That sound, it was laughter, fragile, hesitant, but real. "Oh dear, did someone just laugh?" Briona whispered, exaggerating her fall as the puppet attacked again. This time, the laughter came louder, trembling yet unstoppable. Jazzie leaned forward, her eyes glimmering for the first time, her lips curved in a shy smile. Out in the hallway, Stephen had just stepped out of his office to fetch a file. Amid the rhythm of rain, he heard something he hadn't heard in over a year: his daughter's laughter. He froze, his pulse halting, every nerve strained to catch it again, terrified it was only his imagination. But no, the sound came once more, bright, clumsy, yet undeniably hers. Stephen edged closer, pushing the nursery door open a crack. The sight before him shattered his hardened chest. Briona sprawled on the floor, flailing dramatically, while Jazzie sat above her, fox in her arms, eyes sparkling, lips stretched in a rare, radiant smile. He didn't step inside. He didn't speak. Instead, he gently closed the door, afraid that any intrusion might break the fragile magic. Back at his desk, he sat motionless, staring at blueprints that suddenly meant nothing. For the first time in a year, they held no weight. Only one sound filled his mind, the laughter of his little girl. Fragile, fleeting, yet more precious than anything he had ever built. After that moment, the penthouse seemed to change ever so slightly. Not in any grand way, but with laughter finally breaking the silence. Even briefly, the air felt less suffocating. Briona began to notice Jazzie stealing glances at her now and then, her small lips twitching as if to form words before retreating again. These fragile signs were more precious to Briona than any treasure. Evelyn, too, noticed the difference. One evening she sat beside Briona and whispered, "You've done well. It's been so long since I've seen her stir like this." Briona offered only a quiet smile, reminding herself the road was still long. A single burst of laughter could not heal everything, but at least it was a beginning. Yet fragile beginnings often face storms. Briona longed to do more, to help Jazzie not only laugh, but step out of the cocoon of silence that had bound her for a year. That longing soon led her to try something new, an innocent attempt at healing that would unleash a storm within the house. That morning, after days of rain, the sun finally broke through. Golden light streamed across the penthouse windows, striping the polished wooden floor. The air felt lighter, as if the house itself had sighed with relief. In the nursery, Briona rolled out a large therapy ball she had kept from her medical school days. She knew the technique, simple movements to engage muscles and balance. She sat beside Jazzie, gently guiding the little girl onto the ball. "It's just a game, Jazzie," she whispered softly. "Pretend this is the moon." Jazzie clutched her stuffed fox, her small legs trembling, but she let Briona hold her steady. Slowly, Briona rocked her, inch by inch. Jazzie's tiny body began to straighten, her legs tensing, her back lifting. Hope flickered in Briona's eyes. Then the door burst open. Stephen stood in the doorway, face flushed, eyes blazing. "What the hell are you doing?" he roared. Jazzie shrank instantly, clinging to her fox, her gaze wide with fear. The ball stilled, the room frozen. Briona steadied her voice. "This is a basic therapy technique. I learned it in school. It helps her reconnect with her body." "You're a nanny, not a therapist." Stephen stormed into the room, his voice harsh. "I've hired the best specialists money can buy, and they couldn't fix her. You think you can?" Briona stepped back, cheeks burning with shame. She drew a breath. "I don't want to replace anyone. I only want to help. Jazzie needs to move. She's making progress." "No one asked you to do this," Stephen snapped, lifting Jazzie off the ball. The little girl trembled, burying her face against his shoulder, clinging as if he were her only shelter. Briona stood still, tears burning her eyes. Not from his anger, but from the door that had slammed shut, just as it had begun to open. Later, alone in her room, she sat motionless. Her hands still remembered the warmth of Jazzie's fragile body. Tears slipped down, not from humiliation, but from the ache of watching hope snatched away. Meanwhile, Stephen laid his daughter in her bed, humming softly the lullaby Amelia used to sing. His voice cracked. In his mind, an image of Briona, steady, patient, unyielding, rose again. She was a mirror of everything he had lost: belief, hope, courage. That evening, he found her in the kitchen. Briona stood at the sink, washing dishes, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes swollen from tears. Stephen lingered at the doorway, throat tight. "Briona?" he murmured. She flinched, turning quickly, wiping her eyes. He drew in a breath, his voice lower, rawer. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have shouted. I was just scared." Briona stared, caught off guard. For the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They brimmed with real pain. "I understand," she whispered. "I only want to help." Stephen bowed his head, voice breaking. "I know, and I was wrong. I need you. I need you to help me. Help my daughter." It wasn't just an apology. It was surrender, from a man who had spent his life controlling everything. Briona hesitated, then reached out. Stephen grasped her hand, firm, trembling, but sincere. In that kitchen, among damp dishes and dim light, a quiet reconciliation was born, and with it, the fragile spark of hope. From that day onward, the atmosphere inside the penthouse began to shift. Not with sudden transformation, but like thin ice starting to crack, letting light seep through. Briona continued her usual tasks, preparing simple meals, singing lullabies, reading stories to Jazzie, tidying up the toy corner. But there was a difference now. Stephen no longer passed by with a cold glance. Instead, sometimes he paused, stood quietly watching his daughter, or asked a stiff question. How was she today? At first his tone was dry, more obligation than care. But over time the question became habit, carrying genuine concern. One afternoon, while Briona and Jazzie were building a castle from wooden blocks, Stephen unexpectedly sat down beside them. He picked up a block, fumbling with it awkwardly. "Where does this piece go?" he asked, his voice unusually subdued within his own home. Briona blinked in surprise, but pointed. "Over there, on the left. It's the castle tower." Stephen tried. Wrong. Tried again. Wrong once more. On the third attempt, the block toppled half the castle. Briona's eyes widened, but before she could react, Jazzie burst into laughter. This time it rang out clear, bright as silver bells. Stephen's eyes widened, and then, almost involuntarily, he laughed too. It wasn't polite or forced. It was real. For the first time since Amelia's death, his laughter filled the room. In that moment, they looked like a family, fragile and clumsy, but real. From then on, small changes multiplied. Stephen began coming home earlier, first by minutes, then by hours. He no longer locked himself away in his office each night. Instead, he entered the nursery, sometimes just to watch silently, other times to join a game. Briona gradually opened up too, sharing fragments of her own life. Her mother, her younger brother, the tiny apartment where they scraped together every dollar to survive. Stephen listened, not with mockery or detachment, but with thoughtful eyes. One evening, as the three of them shared dinner together, no more meals eaten alone in his office, Stephen asked quietly, "Is your family doing okay?" A simple question, yet to Briona it felt monumental. She smiled softly. "They're getting better. My mom is stronger now, and my brother's about to graduate." Stephen studied her, his gaze distant, then nodded. "You're strong. I've never met anyone like you." Briona lowered her eyes, warmth blooming quietly within her. He glanced at Briona, something both tentative and sincere flickering in his eyes. "Briona," his voice lowered, "I want to take Jazzie to your home, for her to see, a place that feels truly warm. Would you allow that?" The request startled Briona. For a heartbeat she felt her pulse quicken, but then she smiled softly and nodded. "Yes, I think it would be good for her." The next day, Stephen's sleek car pulled into the modest neighborhood where Briona lived. Their small apartment stood tucked between old buildings, but at the doorway bloomed a cascade of bright pink bougainvillea, lovingly tended by her mother. Briona's mother, frail in frame but bright-eyed, greeted them with a gentle smile. "Welcome, both of you. Please come in." That evening's meal was simple: chicken stew, stir-fried greens, and toasted bread. Yet to Stephen it tasted of something he hadn't known in years: family. Jazzie sat at the table, not withdrawn as usual. She listened to the chatter, her eyes gradually brightening. As the sun dipped low, Briona's younger brother dashed in, a colorful kite in hand. "Jazzie, want to fly a kite?" The little girl hesitated, then looked to Briona. With her gentle nod, Jazzie slowly rose to her feet. Out in the open field behind the neighborhood, the wind rushed strong. The kite soared high, colors dancing against the sky, pulling delighted shouts from the boy. Jazzie ran after him, hair flying, her old stuffed fox bouncing in her arms. And then pure laughter burst forth, ringing across the wide expanse. Briona stood beside Stephen, her chest tight with emotion. This was no timid giggle, no cautious sound. It was real laughter, innocent and free. Stephen froze, his eyes glistening, his hand instinctively tightening around Briona's. In that moment, everything else dissolved: the grief, the silence, the invisible walls. All that remained was the vast sky, the soaring kite, and the joyful laughter of a child reclaiming her childhood. That night, instead of returning to the cold penthouse, Stephen accepted the offer to stay at Briona's modest home. The small house was simple, yet warm, filled with the scent of old wood and the herbal tea her mother had just brewed. In the little room where Briona had set up a spare bed, Jazzie slept soundly, her arms wrapped tight around her stuffed fox. For the first time in months, a faint smile lingered on her face, soft and fragile, like the last streak of sunlight at dusk. Briona stood in the doorway, watching quietly, her heart swelling with a feeling she could hardly name. Stephen stepped beside her, his eyes fixed on his daughter's face. In that gaze, for the first time, there was peace, tinged with hope. Briona stood in the doorway, quietly watching, her heart swelling with an unnamed emotion. Stephen stepped beside her, his eyes lingering on his daughter's face. For the first time, there was peace in his gaze, woven with hope. The next morning, the aroma of toasted bread and fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Briona's mother prepared a simple breakfast, while her younger brother chattered with Jazzie, showing her how to tie shoelaces. No longer withdrawn, Jazzie gave a shy nod and even smiled at his playful teasing. Before leaving, Stephen shook Briona's mother's hand with respect, while Jazzie leaned in for a gentle hug as though she had known her forever. The boy ran after them to the door, waving enthusiastically, and Briona lingered at the threshold, her eyes meeting Stephen's. In his small nod, there was something deeper than words. The car rolled away, leaving behind the warmth of that humble home. The sky above was clear and bright, yet none of them knew that only hours later a storm would break, bringing with it memories, sorrow, and a chance for healing. That weekend, the sky turned without warning. Heavy storm clouds rolled in, winds howled between skyscrapers, and rain poured down in torrents. Thunder rumbled through the city. Lightning split the night. The penthouse, usually radiant, now lay draped in gray, weighed down like the unspoken sorrows of its inhabitants. In the living room, Jazzie curled tightly in Briona's arms. Each clap of thunder made her flinch, her tiny hands clutching Briona's blouse with trembling fear. Her small face had gone pale, eyes glossy with terror. Briona held her close, whispering, "It's all right, Jazzie. I'm here. The storm will pass." At that moment, Stephen entered. He did not stand at a distance as before, but sank down beside them, his eyes fixed on his daughter's frightened face. After a brief hesitation, his hand reached out, resting over Jazzie's small fingers, steady, warm. "Daddy's here, little princess," he murmured, voice rough. Jazzie's trembling began to ease. Yet it was Stephen who seemed most undone. A flash of lightning lit his face, revealing eyes swollen with unshed tears, jaw clenched against a breaking sob. He whispered, almost to himself, "Amelia, she loved storms. The last time we were together, it was raining just like this." Briona lifted her gaze, saying nothing, only listening. Stephen drew a ragged breath, his voice cracking. "I was arrogant. I thought money, power could shield us from everything. Then, one accident, and she was gone. I blame myself every single day. Worse, I nearly lost my daughter too, because I built walls instead of holding her close." The first tear slipped down his cheek. He bowed his head, trembling, grief spilling at last. Briona placed her hand on his shoulder, then wrapped her arms around him. Her whisper was soft as rain against the roof. "You're not a monster, Stephen. You're a father who got lost, but you're finding your way back, and that's what matters." Her words unlocked something deep within. Stephen broke down, not in shouts or rage, but in quiet tears that finally set him free. Outside, the storm still raged, but within the living room, the tempest began to calm. Jazzie, nestled between her father and Briona, closed her eyes, her breathing steady, as if she too had finally found peace. And beneath the sound of rain, the three of them sat together, allowing sorrow to melt away, and hope to quietly return. It began to change, as though the warmth from Jazzie's first steps had seeped into every corner of the home. Now the vast apartment brimmed with new sounds, the laughter of a child, the murmur of gentle conversations, the patter of small feet racing down the hall. Walls once silent were now covered with Jazzie's drawings, tiny houses, glowing suns, butterflies of every color. Toys scattered across the floor, no longer staged like ornaments, but living proof that life had returned to this place. Stephen was transformed. The man who once lived on meetings and business calls now ventured into the kitchen. He learned to cook simple meals, sometimes burning the bread, yet filling the kitchen with laughter from all three of them. One morning, Briona walked in to find Stephen kneeling by the window, hands stained with soil, carefully planting small pots of herbs. "For Jazzie to see something green," he explained, his voice quiet, like a confession that he too needed this new life. As for Jazzie, she blossomed like a seedling breaking free from darkness. At first, just a few shaky steps into Briona's waiting arms. Then, day by day, she began running across the living room, hair flying, laughter ringing like music. And then, one golden afternoon, the miracle came. Briona was stooping to gather scattered blocks when she heard it. A small, clear call, delicate as the first breath of spring. "Briona!" She froze, her heart skipping. Turning, she saw Jazzie running toward her, stuffed fox held high, eyes bright with light. Her tiny lips had spoken Briona's name for the first time after more than a year of silence. Briona swept her into her arms, tears streaming down her cheeks as her smile glowed. Behind them, Stephen stood with glistening eyes, his hands loosening as if afraid to touch and break the fragile wonder before him. What once seemed ordinary, a shared meal, a green sprout, a simple name spoken, had become extraordinary. In a home that had long felt lifeless, life itself had returned, shining brighter than any light could. That afternoon, Stephen drove Briona and Jazzie out of the city. The road curved through rows of golden autumn trees, the breeze carrying the scent of earth and crisp sunlight. Jazzie sat in the back seat, hugging her stuffed fox, humming a little tune. The car stopped before a small house in the suburbs. White walls, a simple porch, and a garden bursting with roses in full bloom. Briona stepped out in awe, her hand brushing petals still jeweled with dew. "This is the house I just bought," Stephen said softly. "A place to truly live, not just exist. A place for Jazzie and for us." They wandered through the garden. Jazzie darted along the paths, her tiny feet brushing the grass, her laughter rising like birds in sunlight. Briona watched her, heart swelling with emotion. When she turned back, Stephen was there, holding a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a simple yet radiant ring. "Briona?" His voice trembled, but his gaze was steady. "I'm not asking out of duty, not because Jazzie needs a mother. I'm asking because I love you. You brought light back into my life, and you're the one I want beside me for the rest of my days." Briona froze, tears spilling. She glanced at Jazzie running through the roses, then back at the man before her. "Stephen, I've been Jazzie's mother for a long time already, even if no one said it aloud, and I've been part of this family since the first day I stepped into that home." She offered her hand. He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hand trembling but firm. Jazzie turned, squealing with joy, as she saw them embrace among the roses. The golden sunset bathed the garden in light. 3 once-broken souls had found each other, not in perfection, but in a love strong enough to heal every wound. At last, the family was whole, and the simplest moments, once ordinary, had become the most extraordinary gift of all.